At the end of 1991, Sega and Nintendo were locked in a fierce battle for control of the video game market. Sega's Genesis delivered a major blow to the Super Nintendo with the release of Sonic the Hedgehog and an aggressive marketing campaign. Meanwhile, the Game Boy was crushing all other handhelds on the market with a strong library and a low cost of entry. Going into 1992, however, some of the most popular games of the fourth generation were released, adding to the growing war between Sega and Nintendo. This is the story of the Great Console War between Sega and Nintendo. In this part, we'll be discussing some of the most notable games of 1992, the success of an arcade classic, and an add-on that would start an entire revolution in gaming. Since the early days of home consoles, games were either pre-installed on a game console or were produced on interchangeable cartridges. Game cartridges were incredibly popular, with almost every major gaming system using them during the late 70s and 1980s. This wouldn't last forever. In 1982, Sony and Philips came together to create the CD, or compact disc. While the CD was originally conceived as a successor to vinyl records, developers quickly made note of the storage capabilities CDs offered. Compared to cartridges of the era, CDs could have 1,000 times more storage and offer higher quality audio to boot. The only downside to the medium were its longer load times and the cost for consumers. CDs were mostly used for music after their introduction. Video games got their first CD player with the TurboGrafx CD, when it launched in Japan in late 1988. A North American launch followed in 1989, and it didn't come cheap. The TurboGrafx CD retailed for $399.99 and came with no pack-in titles. In 1990, Philips launched the CDI, the first fully disc-based gaming console. Although the CDI featured more functions than just gaming, the cost was still steep, with the basic consumer model launching at $799.99. For Sega, the CD was the future of the video game medium. The sooner they released their own CD-based gaming machine, the better. Development of a CD add-on for the Genesis began shortly after the system's launch in Japan. At the time, Sega was focused on beating the TurboGrafx CD's capabilities with more RAM to speed up load times and process more power. Sega's CD unit was kept under wrap for years, as engineers worked on the future accessory. The Sega CD ran into issues early, however. Additional CPUs were needed to fully power the unit, and an increase in RAM caused the system's development costs to skyrocket. While Sega had initially planned on selling the Sega CD for less than $200, around the same price of the Genesis, the high production cost made this a losing bet. It didn't help that Sega was already losing money on the Genesis, following its price drop in 1991. Sega shifted gears and prepared its marketing campaign. The Sega CD was announced in late 1991 and was released in Japan on December 12th. A North American launch followed almost a year later, on October 15th, 1992. Europe wouldn't receive the add-on until 1993, despite the large Sega fan base across the continent. In North America, the Sega CD launched at a staggering price of $299.99. Sega promoted the add-on as a premium piece of hardware that could play games far too powerful for Nintendo's year-old Super Nintendo. The launch lineup for the Sega CD was nothing to write home about, but decent games followed in the months after release. Most notably, Night Trap came out just a month after the Sega CD released, before its controversial rise in popularity in the coming years. With the Sega CD, Sega managed to hit a home run, despite stock shortages at launch. 200,000 consoles were sold by the end of 1992, and put the ball directly in Nintendo's court. The Super Nintendo's cartridges couldn't offer FMV cutscenes or CD quality audio. To outperform Sega, the designers at Nintendo needed another avenue to cram more power into the Super Nintendo. If Nintendo dominated the gaming world in the late 80s, and Atari controlled it before them, who was the biggest name in video games before all of that? It wasn't a publisher or a console manufacturer, it was a place, the arcade. From the release of Pong until the great market crash of 1983, arcades were the go-to venues for hot new video games. Arcade titles were still popping up here and there, but by the late 80s and early 90s, the arcade scene was mostly dried up. One genre of video games was stronger than ever in arcades: fighting games. Some notable fighters of the late 80s and early 90s included SNK's Fatal Fury series and Street Fighter, first released in 1987. Street Fighter wasn't a huge success at the time of its release, but Capcom, the publisher of the game, saw promise. After the completion of Street Fighter, the game's director and planner both left Capcom to work for SNK on what would become the Fatal Fury series. In their place, a new team stepped up to work on Street Fighter II, being led by producer Yoshihiko Okamoto. Street Fighter II hit arcades across the world in March of 1991 and quickly became a major hit. The game's focus on combos and command-based special moves made it even more popular, as gamers lined up around arcade machines to watch for new finishers and crisp 16-bit animated glory. Street Fighter II also included 6 buttons for control, becoming a pioneer in controller layouts for future fighting games. Street Fighter II's popularity helped turn its characters Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, and more into instant gaming icons. Like many great arcade games at the time, it was only a matter of time before Street Fighter II made its way to home consoles. While a new version of Street Fighter II, known as Street Fighter II Championship Edition, hit arcades in early 1992, a much hotter release was well on its way. In June and July, Street Fighter II was released on the Super Nintendo in Japan and North America respectively. A European version arrived a few months later in December. While the Super Nintendo version paled in comparison to the arcade original, it gave gamers a chance to finally play Street Fighter II at home. Released on a beefy 16 megabit cartridge, Street Fighter II on Super Nintendo was just as big a hit in homes as it was in arcades. Over 6 million copies were sold for the Super Nintendo, making this release of Street Fighter II one of Capcom's best-selling games of all time, and the 5th best-selling game on the Super Nintendo. Sega's wait for Street Fighter II would be excruciatingly long, but well worth it in the end. Street Fighter II Special Championship Edition was released in the fall of 1993. Sega wasn't the only one getting in on the action either. Japanese exclusive version of Street Fighter II Championship Edition was released on the TurboGrafx 16 in June of 1993. Just like the Super Nintendo version, Street Fighter II was a big hit on the Genesis. It sold over 1.5 million units on the system and became the 7th best-selling game for the console. Capcom's loyalty to Nintendo marked this as a decisive win for the Super Nintendo, as the year head start gave Street Fighter II fans all the more incentive to pick up a Super Nintendo. Critics also claimed that the Genesis version was inferior to the Super Nintendo version. The biggest difference came from the controllers. While the Super Nintendo had only 4 face buttons, the included shoulder buttons let programmers map Street Fighter II's 6-button layout across the controller. On the other hand, the Genesis only had 3 face buttons on the standard Genesis controller, complicating gameplay. Sega did release a 6-button Genesis controller to help combat these issues, but it did little to help the original release of Street Fighter II for the system. Street Fighter II saw additional releases on both the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting released on the Super Nintendo in August of 1993, being almost identical to the Genesis version of Street Fighter II Special Championship Edition. The Genesis and Super Nintendo both received Super Street Fighter II during the summer of 1994, following the game's original release in arcades in 1993. Street Fighter II was even ported to the Game Boy in 1995, although a Sega Game Gear version was never released. Street Fighter II not only helped revitalize the arcade industry, but it helped make fighting games more than just a niche genre. Since its release, Street Fighter has become one of Capcom's most popular game series, with new entries still being made today. It's estimated that Street Fighter II has generated more than $10 billion in revenue across the arcades and its various ports to other game consoles. Street Fighter II was a major hit on all systems, but it was clear that Nintendo held the advantage going forward with fighting games. Unfortunately for Nintendo, the next major fighting game was just around the corner, and it was unlike anything else in arcades. Sega's holiday win over Nintendo in late 1991 gave the company some much needed momentum, especially the North American branch. Sonic was a hit and could go toe-to-toe with Mario. It seemed like only a matter of time before a sequel would be greenlit. The only problem? Sonic's creator, Yuji Naka, left Sega after finishing development on the game. Naka wouldn't be gone for long. He was convinced to rejoin Sega to help develop a sequel to Sonic the Hedgehog. However, it wouldn't be with the team that made Sonic in Japan. He would be creating Sonic 2 in America. Naka joined Sega Technical Institute, based out of Sega of America's headquarters in California. Sega Technical Institute, or STI, was a new development team, led by game design protege Mark Cerny. Naka and Cerny were joined by other members of the original Sonic development team, including Hirokazu Yasuhara, the lead level designer. Production began in late 1991 for a 1992 release. Development was progressing over at STI. The team, led by Naka, was experimenting with 3D on the Genesis and creating new characters for the Sonic series, and much like Sonic 1, the marketing team at Sega was ready to make Sonic 2 the biggest release of 1992. Armed with over $10 million, Sega began showing off Sonic 2 at events like CES and on television with shows like Nick Arcade. The release date for Sonic 2 also marked a monumental shift for games. During the early days of the Genesis, Super Nintendo, and well before then, video games were shipped from manufacturers to stores and distributors across the country. Once the games arrived, they were placed on the shelf to be sold. There were no street dates for video games, leading some areas to get new games months before others could. For Sonic 2, Sega opted for something different, the first worldwide launch of a video game. For the team at STI, this quickly put them on a timer. Delaying the game would cost Sega millions and caused the game to slip out of the coveted holiday release. Additional employees were flown out from Sega of Japan to help finish the year-long production of Sonic 2 and help it meet its release date. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 released in North America and Europe on November 24th, 1992, on a day otherwise known as Sonic 2's Day. Japan received the game a few days earlier on November 21st, and Australia, the final region to get the game, saw it released on December 1st. Although it didn't meet its goal of a true worldwide release, the marketing buzz was more than enough. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 debuted to strong critical reception and phenomenal commercial success. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 would sell more than 6 million copies on the Genesis, becoming one of the best-selling games for the system. At the end of 1992, Sega once again won out the holiday season, selling more Sega Genesis consoles than Super Nintendos. But across the sea, Sega was beginning to struggle. Sega of America managed to dent Nintendo's armor in the West, especially in Europe, but the Japanese branch of the company was no match for Nintendo in their home country. The war was just getting started, and the bloodiest battles between Sega and Nintendo were just around the corner. Thanks for watching. This is the fourth part of a multi-part series covering the great console war between Sega and Nintendo. If you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like and share this video on your favorite social media sites to help this channel grow. Subscribe to catch the next video when it comes out next week. In the next part, we'll be taking a look at some of the most mature games on the consoles, the launch of even more game consoles, and a battle between the ever-growing libraries of the Genesis and Super Nintendo.